Hello and welcome to SRIRAM's IAS. I hereby welcome you all into the fourth chapter, or I would say into the series in which we are completing the book of Indian economy by SRIRAM sir himself. And now we will be going to chapter 4. All the three chapters have been completed till now in past 8 or 9 lectures. And I have tried to make sure that I at least value add things from multiple other sources, and I have also kept in mind owing to the I would say key demands of this exam, we have updated like for example in the last chapter we discussed about development and we discussed about the Human Development Report 2025. Further, multiple other indicators of development have been discussed, and some of the indicators like wealth adjusted human development index, inequality adjusted human development index have been discussed in detail in the past lectures, and that is the beauty of these lectures. In this series, we will be moving ahead into the fourth chapter in this video. The fourth chapter, the scheme for this I would say fourth chapter would be that first we will discuss till planning, then we will start the 5-year plans in the next video from 1st till 10th. We will complete all the 10, and then in the third video we will complete 11th and 12th 5-year plan. Then in the next video we will go to post 2017 planning, that is our next chapter. Clear? With this, let's begin today's discussion. Now, economic planning and why should we plan, or why economic planning should be there, or who should plan for the state. If you remember, the NCERT starts with the 3 central problems of economies of the world. Every economy of the world has 3 central problems. Who should produce, how, and for whom. Who, how, and for whom. Like what should we produce, for whom should we produce, who should produce this, and for whom should we produce this. These are some of the basic questions which economics talk about. Not only this, in the subsequent lectures we read about the holistic economics, donut economics. Not only that, we discussed about behavioral economics, we discussed about life economics. Now the horizons of this subject are expanding more and more. The 3 central problems still stand, and they ask for one thing. What is the role of state? Role of state. Should state only plan, or should state help or do or take measures to actually achieve the targets which are set in the planning? That is what we followed till 1991. And in 1991, we took a further step and adopted the mixed economic model. Now, what was till 1991 and what we adopted after 1991, what does this all mean? How planning and role of state in India was decreased or increased, or how did state actually led to the development or growth of Indian economy? We will discuss that in this lecture. So, from 1951 to 2017, we will read about India's economic I would say prospect or India's economic journey. Simple. Before we go into this lecture deeper, I would like to highlight that at SRIRAM's IAS, we provide you best mentors, right mentors. If you have any issue with your UPSC preparation, you can scan this QR code, fill the Google form, and then connect to a right mentor at SRIRAM's IAS. Further, these are the contact details. This is our Telegram channel where you can find the PPTs of this lecture also. And whatever assignments I give you, you can directly post them over there, or you can connect to me also, and I will be checking all your assignments whichever I assign you in these lectures. Clear? Now, one more thing. Let's start with planned economy. What does planned economy mean, and why do we plan in economics? Planned economy is simply, or I would like to talk about this, that it is planned or command economy. Very simple. Who has the control over the resources? Who controls the economic resources or utilization of economic resources? What kind of goods should we produce? Where should we invest? Where should we use this capital? That is all set in the planning of economy. First, If it is state-led growth, that is, the state or government will assign and dictate all the things in plans. State takes the responsibility of economic growth. It manages the key sectors and there is central planning. At the central level, there is one body which sets all the plans, and for us it was Planning Commission, which was I would say replaced by Niti Aayog in 2015. Thereby, the priorities are set with, by the government, with private sector playing a residual role. That is, all the other parts where there is not too much role to play, those sectors are given to private sector, and private sector can furnish, or I would say prosper in those sectors. For example, I would say if the state, or if this economy is led by state, or if the state is controlling all the resources, or state is having majority stake in this I would say economy, or state is developing the economy at all, it is all the responsibility lies on state. State has all the things planned in its 5-year plans, 1 year or 2 year plans. What will happen is, for example, this pen or production of this pen, which might be happening in a small scale industry or a medium scale or a micro scale industry, that will be left for private sector. But if there is a large scale, I would say production chain of these mobile phones, maybe that will be controlled by state, because that might be providing employment to or high scale employment or employment to a larger population. That is where state differentiates the economic modules in the planned economy, or state having the larger role in economics to play. That is where comes in place a debate between command economy and market-led economy. Now, what is command economy and what is market-led economy? Command economy is simple, where state defines or has a larger role, which I was talking about till now. But what is market economy? Remember that when we started this video, or when we started this series, in the first chapter only, in the first slide only, we discussed about 3 things in economy, that is production, and this was discussed in the introduction video, which is of 17 minutes, the first video. Producers, consumers, both are rational players in the market. They will work based on their interest, that is profit and utility. They will work on these 2 motives. The more profit a producer gets, he will produce more. The more utility a consumer gets, he will consume more. Simple, very simple. Or I would say, the more consumption of one single good a consumer does, his utility to consume that good, or his utility or the satisfaction by consumption of that good decreases, hence thereby decreasing the demand. Understood? One more thing which you need to remember. Now, this production and consumption in the market was assumed back then by the classical thinkers, whether that was Adam Smith or whether that was Simon Kuznets. All of them, they assumed that these producers and consumers should be left alone and they will work on their own, and there should be least role of the state. State should not intervene into them. State should let them free, and that is free market economics. That there should be no one to come and control them. That was the capitalistic idea of market economics. Clear? However, this state-led economy, or where there is command economy, or where there is planned economy, this is a thought of socialist economy. Clear? Understood? Now, moving ahead. Why India chose planning? First, it had colonial legacy. India witnessed that we were under the colonial rule, and there was a deep resentment of British exploitation. And this resentment among the freedom fighters of India towards British, this led to the thought that East India Company, which came here and established itself, was let free to do trade. Everything was free to it, and it utilized or misused all those powers, misused all the dastaks, farmans which were given to it, and established its rule. That is how capitalist economy works. Because back then in 1600s, when it got the charter, it was said that, okay, you have the monopoly to trade with East. Now, this East India Company disrupted or there was a distrust towards private trade in India or private enterprise in India. Further, there was weak private sector. Why? Because of the absence of significant domestic private sector, or I would say India was facing with poverty at large, and with that problem, that poverty at large, we had very less capital, we had very less savings, and in order to convert those savings into investment, there was very I would say menial, or rather I should say that a least number of capital or money was converted into investment because of the absence of banking system, because of the large presence of money lenders and intermediaries who used to exploit the farmers and agricultural income. That is why India got inspired by Soviet. Now, how was the Soviet inspiration there? Because there was success in USSR's planning. In 1920s, this attracted Indian leaders, and they seek rapid development of India also through the Soviet planning. Further, in order to establish social justice, for example, I should remind you that there was a thought process in the freedom fighters and in the large scale population that the caste-based discrimination, women or the population in poverty, they have been facing historical injustice for long now, and India had majority of its population below poverty line. At that time, we had illiteracy, we had low development, our per capita income was very less. That is why Indian government or Indian leaders at that time thought that we should work for social justice. We should provide the benefits of economy to all. This rule of inequality should end. That is why India adopted towards planning. Now, these points are very much important to answer in mains. Clear? Because every year, or I would say rather, planning is a theme which is always repeated in UPSC. Remember? Now, how did the vision of planning start? From, or I would say earlier, before independence, till independence or till 1951. How did this planning start and what was the main goal of these plans? First, it started with the Vishveshwaraya plan. I would rather remember you or try to recall all of you that we just a few minutes back had a discussion between command economy, socialist economy and free market economy. Now, once you understand that free market economy is something where state's role is limited and less role, thereby this plan comes up from a civil engineer, a designer of India's economy, or a designer of, I would say, architect of Krishnaraja Sagar Dam. An engineer who, there is an irony with engineers, and there was a person who actually developed the Moniac machine. Do you remember his name? William B. Phillips, if you remember it, or rather I should say I have discussed it lately in the second or third chapter, third video. We discussed about the Moniac, we discussed about that how in the post-World War II, this concept of circular flow of income or concept of macroeconomics came into picture, and how actually it was depicted literally through that machine, that how this economy works. And that too was by an engineer who taught himself, not from a school, and then later on he joins London School of Economics, and then he gives multiple theories of the macroeconomics. Similarly, M. Vishveshwaraya, a civil engineer who published India's first 10-year plan in 1934. Now, this plan talks about the goal of this plan was to double India's national income within 10 years. Second, it advocated government leadership and official planning body for the planning at central level. One more thing, that was it emphasized on comprehensive statistics collection. It focused on poverty eradication through growth. So thereby, the main objective of this plan was to understand and establish economic growth of India and at least ensure that we have an income, or I would say national income, doubled in just 10 years. That was about M. Vishveshwaraya plan of 1934. Second, post this, we established a National Planning Committee in 1938. This committee was led by Jawaharlal Nehru, who prepared plans for adequate living standards and poverty eradication in India. This was before independence itself, remember it. One more thing, they focused on heavy industrialization, or heavy industry was in focus. They said that heavy industries are essential for overall growth. For building other industries, and self-reliance is required for public ownership. For example, we should develop iron and steel industry, because that development or building iron and steel industry, that will help us in developing all the other sectors. If we start manufacturing iron and steel in India, then only car making or other factories, whether that is truss making, whether that is car making, whether that is bridges, all of this will then roll out, or I would say there will be a rollover effect of this heavy industry, that is iron and steel industry, over all the other industries, whether that is railways or any other industry. Second, land redistribution was one of the key focus, because we had majority, rather I would say we had majority of the population dependent on agriculture, and proposed that we should take away the land from major landowners and distribute among all, and there should be equity in land holdings. One more thing to remember, that was Bombay Plan. This was brought in 1944. Bombay Plan was introduced by some of the famous businessmen of 1940s like J.R.D. Tata, G.D. Birla, Sir Purushottam Das, who created a plan of economic development for India. Now, what was the plan for economic development of India? It included first minimum requirement of nutrition, literacy, sanitation, housing and basic human needs, that everyone in India should at least get all of these facilities. It induced and called for that there should be state infrastructure. State should help and bring in infrastructure or invest in infrastructure, which will first generate employment, and second, it will lead to the overall growth of economy. First, if there is roadways, then only transport industry will work, and if transport industry is there, then only the produce from far away rural areas, agriculture, that will come to the markets. Remember? So thereby, we should focus on both heavy industry, infrastructure, and there should be investment in basic industries, heavy industries like steel industry. The growth targets of this plan was, first, there should twofold increase in agricultural output. We need to increase the output of agriculture. Five-fold growth should be there in industrial sector over the next 15 years. First plan was for 10 years. Second plan was for 15 years. One more thing, social investment should be there in education, health and other sectors. Alternative visions like this was planned by businessmen. Maybe it might be, I would say, a bit tilted towards the capitalistic ideology. However, communists also came into picture. M.N. Roy, who gave the People's Plan, he published the Indian Federation of Labour in 1940. This People's Plan was published in India's or Indian Federation of Labour in 1940s, and it drew attention and asked the state to invest in employment and wages, good wages. He called for radical humanism school of thought, that everyone or our plans should be focused on humanism. They should be focused on the whole humanity. Post this, in 1944, S.N. Agarwal, he came up with a plan named as Gandhian Plan. Why? Because it was inspired by Gandhian ideology of village economics. He talks about decentralization in terms of economy. He talks about agricultural development, mass employment and cottage industry. Now, all of you must answer this question. Cottage industry is mentioned in which directive principle of state policy? Answer this in comment sections. One more thing, remember that we discussed about planned economy and these were some of the attempts towards planned economy. However, we need to understand what is mixed economy, because post 1991 we will adopt mixed economy. First of all, India adopted this mixed economy, a blend of market efficiency with state regulation for fairness and sustainability. India brought in public sector, private sector, and in the complementary to both of them with the state market mix shifting towards the market in 1991. Understood? The public sector, there will be state ownership, there will be state's role or a higher role to state. However, private sector will also come in and have its place. There will be largely privatization of the industries. Only a few industries like till recently it was railways, atomic energy and some nuclear energy that was reserved for private sector, but now we are liberalizing and privatizing that also. There are 4 pillars to planning which we should understand, like first of all growth, first pillar, that generally we focus on growth. First, rapid economic expansion which should benefit all the sectors. Second, self-reliance. We should develop our economy, our reserves, whether that is reserves held by RBI, I would say public stock, or I would say this food grains, stock of food grains, or public distribution system. The resilience should be in every sector, whether that is high yielding varieties, whether that is green revolution, milk revolution, pink revolution, everything, whether it comes from food security to the industrial security to the semiconductor chips or everything, rare earth magnets, everywhere these plans should focus on self-reliance in every sector. We should not be dependent, or the policies of another country should not hamper directly or should not cause major disruption into our economy. That is what we largely mean by self-reliance. One more thing, social justice. Plans are focused on 4 things. One is growth, self-reliance, social justice and modernization. We should invest in space, biotech, nanotech, artificial intelligence, and currently the large language modules or large language models like ChatGPT, these kind of, or the language learning modules, LLMs, we should focus on those. Why so? There was a question in UPSC mains that should India invest in space when its own population is hungry? There has been multiple debate on this, and I would like all of you to answer this and at least write a 500-page write-up on this question. That should India focus on militarization of space or developments in space, or I would say colonization of space, rather than focusing on its own population which is dying of hunger, malnutrition and low birth weight. Child mortality is more. Where should India invest? Should it balance both the things or should it invest in only one sector? That was about growth. Economic growth actually lays the foundation, and state should at least do that much from where the trickle-down effect will start. I would generally call this effect, like for example, in a village far away, maybe in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, or any of the states of I would say Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, any of the states, in a far away village, if a state establishes a milk cooperative or a cooperative which is, I would say, procuring all the coconuts, procuring all the produce which is there in this. If you have read about the story of Palampur, the chapter 1 of class 9th NCERT, thereby it talks about the milk processing units, it talks about the nearby market, it talks about the bullock carts and the transport system which takes the food or freight from the village to the markets. It talks about the nearby market also. Now, tell me, if the state government at least sets up, or I would say starts a manufacturing unit or a packaging unit in this village, and all the produce, whether that is papayas, coconuts or lychees or say makhana or say almonds or say walnuts from that village, it packs it all and then sells it to the markets like Delhi or Mumbai or Pune. Now imagine that how much investment will be there, how much employment will it generate, how much income will it generate for the farmers of that village. Now that is how state should provide for the basis of economic growth, and that will help into the trickle down effect. Because by increasing the income, maybe their education will increase, their health will increase, and the impacts of it will be there on every member of that village. Why? For example, it generated an employment of 100 people. From every family, one person is employed into that unit. Now that one person taking the wages will help all the family to upgrade. That is how it happens. That is why trickle down effect needs to be understood. It is expected to flow to all the people. The benefits of development or benefits of growth, which was to person A, this will trickle down to all the population, whether that is, remember, this approach provides slow, or I would say slow given India's population size. And this approach, though this approach proved slow for India's population size, because our population was growing at much larger speed than our economic growth. However, we need to understand what is the difference between self-reliance and self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is that when we have sufficient resources and sufficient production for ourselves. Self-reliance means that we are depending on country's own resources as much as practical, then resorting to import or foreign investment. This is pragmatic and aspirational self-reliance, that we will focus mostly on our own economy. We will try to utilize as much as our domestic economy can provide. If we need more, then we will import. Pragmatic. Self-sufficiency means that we have everything at our home. Having all the resources, we do not need to ask anyone at all. No country can be self-sufficient. It is unrealistic. Like no person can live in silo. It's only monks and saints or those people who have lost the lust for this world. They go and take, I would say, shelter in far away Kailasha. However, hereby man is a social animal, political animal, by nature a person of interaction or a person who needs others. That is why man created family, man created society, man created state. Thereby, self-sufficiency is not something which we are aspiring for. We are aspiring for self-reliance. Atmanirbhar Bharat, partly similar but different due to historical context, seeks foreign investment but goods which are made in India for domestic use and exports. That is why we introduced the production-linked incentive scheme. Social justice and modernization. Social justice, the inclusive growth talks about both rural and urban growth. Gender disparities should be decreased, caste divisions should be minimized, inter-religion gaps should be decreased, inter-regional gaps should be decreased, regional gaps should be decreased. Modernization, what does that mean? We need to invest in research and development. Education is the foundation for this, and that is why we introduced the National Education Policy 2020. Remember? How should a state achieve balanced growth? We should start with regional balance. That is, like if you remember or if you ask yourself, there is a high difference between the states of who are in hilly areas or Himalayan states and then the northern belt states like UP, Bihar. Then there comes the southern states like Maharashtra, Karnataka, Odisha, and then comes Tamil Nadu, Kerala. Now remember that Maharashtra has the financial capital of India. Further, there comes northeastern states. Now remember that Gujarat, Maharashtra, Delhi, their per capita income or the state GDP of these states is totally different from what is there in northeast and hilly states like Jammu, Kashmir, Himachal or Sikkim. It is totally different. Further, social equity is not there. For example, I will tell you the people from lower castes or the people from the lower castes, or I would say people from the slum areas, or people from the religions, or those religions which are in minority. From those religions we are seeing, or people from, or I would say the women, or people from the differently abled sections. Now these are those sections, or these are those areas where the I would say the effects of development have not reached yet. Thereby we should understand, and we should have at least intergroup disparities. There should be no intergroup disparities among the communities, whether that is religious community, regional community, tribes, or any other. Economic equality should be there, and we should decrease the economic inequality. And if you remember that this year's Gini coefficient, or the report which is published, Wealth Equality Report of the World, that mentioned that India might be a fourth largest I would say economy in terms of equality also. Why? Because our Gini coefficient actually improved. However, that was criticized because our I would say the actual ratios, or the actual difference which is given by quintile ratio and decile ratios, that showed a different picture. Now remember that we need to understand that in terms of equality, we will read about equality. This quintile and decile ratios, we will discuss it, and Gini coefficient, we will also discuss that. Lorentz curve, we will discuss that. But before that, we need to understand that there is high inequality in India. I guess around 2 to 5% of the population is holding around 70% of the wealth of the nation. That is where economic equality should be established. And for this, for establishing economic equality, these plans have a greater role to play. Funding the 5-year plans, or we will just understand that how 5-year plans worked. Plans were funded through combination of resources, ensuring that there is comprehensive resource mobilization. Like government budgets, union and state governments will allocate funds for the plans. Sector-wise investment will be done in the public sector and private sector. Both the investments will be taken care of. Foreign flows, we will at least mention or understand that how we can attract more and more FDI. Soft loans can be generated from countries or international organizations. Like, for example, Mumbai-Ahmedabad bullet train was financed by a soft loan from Japan. Recently we mentioned this. Now in the next lecture we will start with the 5-year plans, starting with the first 5-year plan, target, growth, what was achieved and what was missed. We will discuss the mains aspect of these plans and prelims aspect of these plans. Both will be discussed. With this, I would take a leave from all of you. Thank you for being here. Jai Hind.